Korean TV shows go all in on what caters to their audiences or just like to human interest. For example, it's like revenge, cheating, divorce, academic scandals. That could be more of like a Korean thing. Rich people being bad, chaebol families getting screwed. Rich families looking down poor families. Somehow the poor families are all single parents. Squid Game, Physical 100, Singles Inferno, The Glory. It's become normal for Americans to binge watch Korean TV shows on Netflix and then have like cooler talk at the office or on social media. And it's not just Americans. In 2022, 60% of Netflix subscribers watched Korean titles. In 2023, Korean series and films have regularly featured in Netflix's top 10 list in more than 90 countries. And 3 of Netflix's most watched shows ever are from Korea. And that's why in this episode, we're going to cover Korean TV shows and Netflix and why they're both intertwined. Today, I'm joined by Kathy, who's a new guest on our K-Content podcast. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks for having me. I'm not an expert on Korean TV shows by any means, but I'm a huge fan of discovering new shows, especially if they're based in Asia or about the Asian diaspora. As John mentioned, Korea has been playing a huge role at the forefront of a renewed movement for Asian media. So I'm really curious, how does Netflix fit into all of this?
Just like how we covered the different generations of K-pop artists in our K-pop episode, some people have started to try to group different TV shows around the same years into so-called like eras. And a lot of people identify Netflix as an era for Korean TV shows in itself. And a lot of people date it from 2018 to 2021. 2018 because that's when the first Netflix original Korean TV show aired. And using the K-pop analogy, the Psy moment for Korean TV shows was Squid Game in 2021. So that's how we got the 2018 to 2021 timeline. And Squid Game changed everything. Squid Game, it became the most watched show ever on Netflix at the time, and it helped spur interest in other Korean content. And in April of that year, to coincide with the visit by the South Korean president to the United States, Netflix said that it was investing $2.5 billion into Korean shows and movies in the next 4 years, which is double its investment since 2016. But there was also what I call a mini Psy moment, and that was the Netflix original Crash Landing on You, which aired during the height of COVID in 2020. And then, I'm sure you remember everyone just stuck at home. We've got internet, and people were running out of content to watch. So somehow the algorithm or the discovery, people started watching that show. And I think that show specifically helped push K-content viewership higher too. So at the end of the day, it feels a little bit like another topic we covered or another story we covered in the esports episode where, StarCraft launched at the right time, especially in Korea when it was the height of their, PC bong. So good product market fit and timing.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money. Do you know why Netflix was so interested in Korean content specifically? Of course, Squid Game's success must have played a part, but I'd imagine there's more reasoning behind such a large investment.
Yeah, so I think it originally started not just in Korea. It was really a lot of different global markets where they have video production. Korea just happened to have invested a lot into it based on that 1994 quote I keep mentioning about Jurassic Park. So let's just start from the top. Step one for all the streamers was to go global first. And Netflix was the first to go global. Prime Video was second. Once you go global, the next step is to, when I say go global, it means to make your service available globally. The next step is to figure out how do you get more local content that people want to watch. Of course, American content was the most ubiquitous and popular in the world, but people in Japan maybe want to watch some Japanese content, and people in Brazil want to watch some Brazilian content. So then Netflix came up with this model called the glocal model, which is local production, global distribution. And that's interesting because it's not just, hey, make a Korean TV show for Korean audiences. It's invest in great storytelling from Brazil, from Korea, from Vietnam, but it has a potential for a global audience. And that's why, now we're always talking about Korean TV shows, but I remember back in 2016, I was hooked on this show called 3%. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it was this cool, like, dystopian sci-fi Brazilian show. Essentially, Netflix normalized watching local content.
Yeah, that sounds cool. And I don't know if this was necessarily local content, but Netflix has had a huge impact on my access to global content. I still remember when my dad would subscribe to their DVD service. And we discovered a ton of great foreign movies. That was the category it was under. He was really into old French films and Japanese horror movies, of all things. So maybe not the best content for an elementary school kid, but I'm pretty sure he just fell into the rabbit hole of ratings and recommendations. And we almost always had a Netflix DVD in our house. I also remember when streaming first became available, it was so convenient for me to find movies in Spanish to use for my Spanish class assignments. So it was also how my dad discovered anime.
And it's so interesting once you study these content types because, like, for example, when I was at Amazon, I did a lot of research on anime because it was my dream to, like, produce an anime. But I didn't end up doing it. But what I found out was France was the second largest market for manga outside of Japan. And it's just weird. You wouldn't, like, think of that. You think maybe United States because it's so big. Or maybe even Japan. I'm sorry, maybe even Germany, because Germany had a big. Germany has one of the biggest readership bases out there, but it was France. So, like K-pop started catering the music and their artists to some of their largest markets, like we talked about debuting an artist in Japan, China, or the U.S. I read that anime is starting to tailor. Japanese anime is starting to tailor some of their content to French audiences as well.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's that's really cool. And I can only imagine how much Netflix's discovery systems have improved over the years. So, what do you know about discovery on Netflix?
Yeah, so what's cool about just discovery and everything we're talking about is, when you're just a fan, I don't think you think too much about it, or I didn't. And it's once I got into making content and thinking about it as a product, I started diving into some of the research behind it. And long story short, everyone wanted to. Now I think it's called like Magma, but the previously it was called Fang, and and the reason we have Fang was because they wanted to add the N for Netflix, because Netflix was or still is one of the most innovative companies, especially in regards to content discovery, distribution, all that. They invented a lot of these things, and if you're a technical person, you know that the Netflix tech blog is like pretty fire. Like you read their tech blog to find out new things. So this was back in 2006. Netflix offered at the time, which seemed like a huge prize, a $1 million Netflix prize, just to improve their recommendation engine. Recommendation is important because roughly 75% of all shows watched on Netflix are based on recommendations. And today, we don't even like think about this as a product term because people are just like, oh yeah, like TikTok is so smart, it knows what to give me. But that's a recommendation algorithm as well, and it's amazing. But I think the TV recommendations are much harder because they have so much more to analyze versus TikTok, which are like short form videos, right? So I think people just don't. Maybe if you work outside of tech, you don't really credit Netflix with figuring this out. And recommendations are kind of super technical, but I'm gonna just cover maybe the high level and maybe more of the business objectives it was trying to achieve. And when we're talking about the Netflix prize, back then in the beginning, it was mainly about just figuring out, hey, what's the best content to recommend to each subscriber, and then we hope that this will keep them subscribed. But starting around 2019, that's when I started analyzing this. I was at Amazon. That's when the streaming wars really ramped up. And now I think the streaming wars are kind of over, but it was like the biggest topic in entertainment back then. and it was Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus launched that year, I believe. I think HBO Max launched that year as well. And because there's such a competition for good content, it increased the price of getting good content. And then, if you're like a PM or content acquisition professional at these streamers, you had to justify why you're paying certain amounts of money for your content. And that's when their recommendation system started to evaluate what people would watch to keep their subscription, which is different than just like, hey, what content do you like? Because what they found out, and then later through other companies like Prime Video and also through Disney Plus, is certain content were more likely to keep you subscribed. It may be content that maybe you don't even watch because now we have family plans. So that's why Disney Plus, their whole thing was, the parents kept their plans because their kids wanted to watch the movies, right? Things like that. So without disclosing too many of the technical details, that's roughly what Netflix created. And frankly, they were the innovators, so other streamers just try to copy them. One streamer in particular is interesting, Prime Video. Yeah, I used to work there because Amazon was just in so many businesses so that it wasn't just subscriptions, right? It could be, hey, maybe by watching this show, you bought more toilet paper. I mean, I use that as a funny example, but you bought more, I don't know, dental treats for your dog, right? Like you could really see how you could create all sorts of analysis on what people would buy and is it because you bought this dental treat and now you happen to watch the show? Did this show help you buy the dental treat? I mean, you could take it in so many directions.
Yeah, I think that really helps highlight the similarities between recommendations and ads as well. There's a pretty fine line, I think, between serving a customer's needs and fulfilling business objectives. A great recommendation engine, I think, should make the customer's lives easier, or at least more interesting, but they definitely also serve the role of keeping us engaged longer. Stay subscribed, keep scrolling, ramp up the clicks and views. So, taking a few steps back, John, we mentioned earlier the right place, right time phenomenon when it came to Korean TV shows on Netflix, but the shows themselves still actually have to be good, right? Could you talk a bit more about why you think Korean TV shows are doing well globally?
Sure. It's just like our K-pop episode where Mindy was offering a couple of her thoughts. Same thing. Like I haven't really found studies on why certain TV shows, whether they're Korean or not, are popular or not. So one big thing though is to say we know for sure that there are a lot of good shows that don't get enough discovery or an audience. Or they may have a higher chance of becoming a hit if they did, which is why everybody wants to go to Netflix, right? That's another reason why Netflix is so important. Now, that being said, because Netflix has a big audience and we see so many different types of Korean shows, we do have some anecdotal data points of why they're successful. So number one is Korean TV shows go all in on what caters to their audiences or just like to human interest. For example, it's like revenge, cheating, divorce, academic scandals. That could be more of like a Korean thing. Rich people being bad, chaebol families getting screwed, rich families looking down poor families. Somehow the poor families are all single parents. And there's a lot of like over catering to different audience types. I've watched, I seriously, I average like 20 Korean shows per year. And it's replaced my, 1,000 league games per year. And almost every K-drama that's like romance focused, there's always, the main characters are always like super young and beautiful or handsome. They're like in their 20s or 30s. But there's always like a 40 or 50-year-old woman, which is in their society considered old, who's like divorced or her husband died or something. There's always some love arc just for her, right? There's always some like younger guy fighting for her or something. And it's just so cheesy, but they're just giving their audience what they want, right? Which I think is awesome. They're like they know what their audience wants. They're giving them that product. And then if it's like a female lead, as I said, they're usually younger, and they've got like 3 guys fighting over them. It's always like some rich guy who's like pretending not to be rich. but he's secretly from this chaebol family, and like it's always like a grandfather. The dad's somehow always dead, so the grandfather is always trying to groom the next generation, and he's making them like work as like an assistant or like working their way up, stuff like that. And then one guy's always like evil or bad, and one guy's like average. So that's number one. Number two is, which I think is a pretty good innovation. I'm not sure if it's on purpose or not, but unlike America, a lot of the TV shows in Korea typically last one season. And that's not to say that they don't have shows with more seasons, they do. But I think by having one season, there's a lot more room for experimentation, and you have to really innovate to survive. For example, Grey's Anatomy, there's like season 20, and we worked on the Survivor project together. It's like Survivor is up to season 46. I didn't even know that until last night. And speaking of Survivor, as an example, Survivor made the survival show / competition format, and there has been some innovations throughout the past, but not as much that the Korean shows are doing. So just looking at survival / competition shows alone, I remember last year there was like Siren Survive the Island, right? It's like 24 women, 6 teams go head to head in competitions. Last year it was Physical 100. This year I just finished up season 2. And whether it's on Siren or Physical 100, there's this theme of like national pride. There's always like a soldier, a special forces, a firefighter, Olympic athlete. And what's interesting is like the Korean shows, they go super nationalistic, like, and they're not ashamed of it at all. But if we see this from like an American show or even like a Chinese show, we think it's like totally gross. Like, oh my God, they're like super right wing. But it's okay if you're a Korean show, which is why I think from a political perspective, the Koreans are so smart. But because by having so many shows that are kind of like well loved around the world, people just love Koreans and they're okay with what they do. Okay, I talked a lot, but the third point I want to mention is, production value does matter. And I think production value doesn't really matter in games, right? Like if a game is good, people will play it. If it's janky, is buggy, whatever. But I think production value, it does matter for TV shows, even for bad shows. And it's not just production value. It's like this K-beauty standard, right? The Q-beauty standard is like insane. Like they kind of all look the same. They got this like, what's it called? Like the Korean glass skin. Everyone's just ridiculously beautiful, flawless, and they probably got plastic surgery. We kind of talked about that in the K-pop episode as well. They've got like perfect speech. It's like they're trained to be like a newscaster. Once again, I feel like the Koreans just go all in. They're not ashamed of it. The supporting characters are actually, no offense, they look ugly. They're just like ugly, and I feel like there's a whole thing about like ugly Korean actors, and they're always in supporting roles, and even the stuff they wear is like less. The shirts they wear are like less attractive, right? And once again, no DEI backlash. Everyone's cool with this. Like, if you had like an American show and everyone's purely beautiful, they think it's some like cheesy, stupid, like I don't know, like reality show, and like people shouldn't like watch it, right? And then meanwhile, as another example, so it's interesting about production because the Chinese did produce Three Body Problem with the all Chinese cast, and the production quality was relatively low. I'd say I watched a couple episodes, and the storytelling wasn't as great. I do think the Netflix show, which was an American company, they did do like a retake on it, but they didn't use an all Chinese cast. They kind of had to like some people called it like they had to like DEI it. They had to get like a bunch of diverse characters, even though the premise wasn't in China, and they discovered this. So the main point here is production quality matters, and somehow the Koreans kind of get away with just all Korean cast, and it's totally fine. And one last point, because thumbnails, now that we do a lot of work about creators and YouTube, thumbnails are super important. And just like I just challenge people to go take a look at thumbnails on Netflix. And I was just scrolling last night for like a couple minutes, and once again, the Korean shows, it's always like beautiful character, and then for the other shows, it might not even be a character. It could be like an object, an animal, also all sorts of things. So just maybe people will click more if it's a beautiful person on the thumbnail, right? So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So clearly, Netflix has had a role to play in bringing Korean TV shows to at least the United States, but also the global market. If they're promoting content made locally in Korea, the first question that came to my mind is like, what about local streaming services? Can you share what that ecosystem is like?
that's a great question because I was really curious about what happens if we license all the great Korean content and the American streamers have ambitions to have audiences in Korea because Korea has high income and it's a big market, right? So looking at just the market share perspective, Netflix is number one in Korea, 35% market share. I think Disney Plus was like 8 or 9%, but the next streamers, the top number like number 2 to 4 are all Korean. So number 2 is Coupang Play, 23%. TVing, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's 21%. What's interesting is they're primarily owned by CJ ENM, which we covered before, and they're also backed by Naver, which we also covered before. And the third and fourth place is Wave. In December, TVing and Wave signed a deal to merge their platform, so that would bring them to basically second place in the market. And I think all this matters because we've always said that there's some weird like dynamics in Korean company ownership. They all seem to own each other somehow. I don't even know what the point is, and because of that, there's lots of complex relationships and ownership between Korean production. So that's like the Studio Dragons of the world. That's like the SLL, right? Studio Lululala, and the distribution side. So they kind of they can't just give away all their like think of them as Disney. You want to wholesome content for Disney Plus. You don't want to give away all the good content. So because of this and the bidding war that Netflix started for Korean content, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be just less Korean content available. And I think it's like capitalism. We're going to go to other markets. And one market which I think seems interesting, but I'm not sure if they're going to be able to get to like the Korea scale, is Vietnam. So I talk about all this because people think, Netflix, great, more Netflix shows, more Korean shows, everything's grow. But there is a downside to this, which is the local market.
Yeah, for sure. So we've been talking about TV shows specifically for a while now, but we can't completely count out the movie industry either. I remember when Parasite came out in 2019, and people were really impressed by its success on the global stage. For example, it won the Academy Award for Best Picture at the 92nd Academy Awards, becoming the first non-English language film to win that award, not to mention the 3 Oscars, too. So this really got me thinking about how it feels like Asian content in general has become more mainstream in America in the last decade. So not just importing global or local content either, but creating our own. There was Crazy Rich Asians in 2018, Shang-Chi in 2021, Everything Everywhere All at Once in 2022.
So I think you're onto something because it's not like every other country or like region's content becoming popular gets recognized in these award shows or things like that. Like for example, everyone knows that like the French make great films and other TV content, so like it doesn't make the headlines. But for whatever reason, like Asian shows make headlines, right? And once again, kind of like K-pop, like this didn't just happen like overnight. Like I think it's not just like Korean TV shows being popular. People do kind of like group Korea into like broader like Asian content as well. So maybe you could talk a little bit about like the history of quote unquote Asian content and being exported to the West.
Yeah, I think a lot of us think back to Hong Kong cinema, of course, which started in the 1950s, had a cult fandom in the West, then followed by the famous or infamous martial arts movies in the 70s and 80s. A lot of even Asian actors today talk about how it's hard to break out of that martial arts mold because it had such a dominance in Hollywood. And that really made household names out of Asian names, such as Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan. And on TV, though, it feels like, Asian shows are few and far in between. I do remember of like only 1 or 2, which was, Fresh Off the Boat or Kim's Convenience. But really in the past 2 years or so, I've noticed there are more than I can actually get around to. Like recently, I've binged through Warrior, Tokyo Vice, Beef, Brother's Son, and most recently Shogun.
And yeah, Shogun's a good point. I heard all about it. I think, I basically cancel and subscribe to different services based on what shows are out. And I think I had like 1 week left for Hulu, and I just did it. I'm like, oh man, crap, I gotta watch it, but I didn't get a chance. So now I gotta go subscribe to Hulu just for a month just to watch that show. But tell us more about Shogun.
Yeah, so Shogun, it's based off a book, which, there was a movie made about it quite a while ago. The original book and movie were both centered around the English character a lot more than this new show. And this remake, it was created by an American company, but they also tried to keep things really historically accurate to that time period in Japan. So they hired a full Japanese cast, many of which had not acted outside of Japan before, so I thought that was really cool. And they even hired a lot of behavior and culture experts, so they would teach the cast how to speak, act, fight, and even move. And you mentioned something earlier about how people find it really normal to see entirely Korean casts and to watch shows completely in the Korean language, even if they weren't Korean or native speakers. And this reminds me of like the never-ending sub versus dub debate among anime watchers as well. I think we're finally starting to see a world where subtitles are becoming more of the norm, so we can really start enjoying content without completely needing to westernize them.
That's a great point. And I talk to people who still work at these streamers, and dubbing is just more expensive, and you get like voice actors, actresses. On this whole sub versus dub war, I'm definitely, or debate, I'm on the sub side. And really, I think for me, it was really anime. Like just the Japanese voice actresses and actors, they're like so into it. They're like, I don't know, it's like the esports hype person or something. And like I just love it more, and I'm always gonna watch subs for anime at least. And I also found a good quote. Parasite's director said that quote, once you overcome the 1 inch tall barrier of subtitles, you'll be introduced to so many more amazing films. And as I mentioned, I'm on the sub team. I'm on Team Sub. So let's talk about anime because to some degree, anime is one of the most mainstream and popular and globalized type of Asian content, right?
Yeah, definitely. And kind of to your point, I've definitely always been a sub over dub person as well. I think there's a lot that gets lost in translation. There's a lot of kind of Japanese sayings that don't have direct translations. So I think if you're someone that's interested in learning more about different cultures, it's actually really nice to watch something in its original language or its original form to understand it better and maybe learn something. But speaking of anime in the global market, I always think of the Studio Ghibli films as a great example, especially in Hollywood. Before Parasite and Everything Everywhere, I remember my first Asian in theater experience was watching Princess Mononoke. It wasn't like a large theater either. I had to like drive a couple hours out with my family to find this tiny theater that was playing this movie. But it's been in our discourse for a really long time, and almost everyone knows about like Spirited Away and all these other shows or movies. And, we've all been watching, sometimes with trepidation more than interest, how anime has become a new target for live action remakes. We know Disney loves doing live action as well for animation, but I think One Piece was maybe one of the first Japan originated content that they've started creating a live action show for. And, we've seen so much success. And a lot of that was due to how carefully the team at Netflix or the production company as well handled the source material. And they worked super closely with the creator, Eiichiro Oda. I wouldn't be surprised to see even more anime adaptations in the coming years, and I'm honestly pretty excited for that.
And I think what's awesome is that, great stories are everywhere. A lot of the examples we mentioned were books or stories that were written decades ago, and now they're being made into TV shows or remade. Maybe like an anime into like a live action. So I think as just like people who consume content, it's great. It's a great time to be alive. So to summarize, a couple themes here. So just like all the other content types, the Korean government has had just like an active role in promoting and subsidizing to a small degree the Korean TV show landscape. We think that the mini Psy moment was, Crash Landing on You during COVID, and then Squid Game really just blew everything out of the water. And I think that happened in the middle of the streaming wars. Everyone's bidding for Korean content, not just Netflix. And I think by the international streamers, international to Korea, outside of Korea, bidding up all this content and buying up all this inventory, it's put a lot of pressure on the local Korean streamers who also have to survive because they have a complex relationship with the distributors and the production companies. And the ultimate conclusion of this is I foresee less demand for Korean content because there's just not enough and it's too expensive. I think this general broader theme of Asian content being more popular is interesting. I'm starting to see a lot more, not just like anime, but like Japanese TV shows. I've been seeing like Chinese TV shows pop up on Netflix, even a few Vietnamese ones, and who knows which of these will maybe become as big as Korean. But we do know that Japan and China are huge markets, so if they wanted to do it, they have the money to do it. And let's just see if they have like the talent and then like the kind of like the creativity to go do that. So thanks, Kathy. Great episode.
Yeah, thank you.